You think you know the story of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Millions of Africans were torn from their homes, shipped across the Atlantic, and sold into slavery. It's in every textbook and every documentary. But hold on. There's an unbelievable, jaw-dropping truth buried in history that will leave you speechless. The massive enslavement of Native Americans. This wasn't just a footnote, but the backbone of a booming economic engine. When Columbus discovered the Caribbean, indigenous people became human commodities. Entire nations were ripped apart, villages destroyed. Indigenous people were forced into brutal labor in mines, fields, and homes, often in numbers that far surpassed the enslaved Africans brought to North America. And yet, we still hear about Columbus, the explorer, not Columbus, the enslaver. History books and museums leave out the bombshell. Between 2.5 and 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved, more than all the Africans ever trafficked here. But here's the shocker. Europeans rebranded it. With euphemisms like encomienda and debt peonage, they turned unspeakable horrors into something bureaucratic. This isn't just history. It's a massive hidden story about power, erasure, and stolen legacies. So why does this matter? Because forgetting is a choice. And when we erase this history, we miss the full picture of how empires were built and who paid the price. In this video, we will uncover the story of the forgotten slavery and enslavement of Native Americans. Let's begin. Long before Columbus accidentally bumped into the Caribbean, indigenous tribes across the Americas had their systems of captivity. Complex, fluid, and nothing like Europe's later race-based slavery. Think of it like this. While Europeans saw people as property, many native communities saw captives as potential kin, laborers, or even spiritual participants. Take the Tlingit and Haida of the Pacific Northwest. These coastal warriors didn't just raid for resources. They took people. Captives might haul water, weave baskets, or even become family through adoption. In some villages, slaves made up a quarter of the population. But here's the twist. Their kids could walk free, no chains attached. Status wasn't stamped on their DNA. Then, there's the Iroquois, further east. After battles, they'd often adopt captives to replace lost family members, a practice called mourning wars. Imagine being taken in, given a new name, and treated as a relative. It wasn't sunshine and rainbows. Some were forced into labor. But it wasn't a life sentence either. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs had tlacotin, people enslaved for debts, crimes, or war. Sure, some were sacrificed to gods, but others could climb the social ladder. Earn freedom through bravery, marry into higher classes, or buy your way out. The Maya had a similar vibe. War captives might face ritual sacrifice, but skilled artisans or warriors could gain respect and keep their heads. Okay, Columbus. When his ships hit the Bahamas in 1492, he didn't just discover land, he spotted profit. On his second voyage, he kidnapped 550 Taino people, slapped them with the cannibal label, a total lie, and shipped them to Spain. Half died en route. This wasn't exploration, it was a blueprint. The Spanish doubled down with the encomienda system, a gift of indigenous laborers to colonists, justified as teaching Christianity. Translation: forced labor in mines, farms, and homes. Millions died from overwork, disease, and brutality. By the 1500s, the British, French, and Dutch joined the game, trading native captives from Massachusetts to Mexico. Now, let's zoom into Carolinas, the Wild West of human trafficking. By the 1670s, Charleston wasn't just a port, but a slave supermarket. Colonists swapped guns, tools, and clothes for captives, turning tribes against each other. The prize: bodies to work rice plantations or shipped to Caribbean sugar hellscapes. Meet the Westos, a refugee tribe from the Great Lakes. They saw chaos and thought opportunity. Armed with European guns, they raided Florida's Timucua and the Catawba in the Piedmont, selling captives to Charleston. Their business boomed until rivals like the Savannah River tribes got fed up and obliterated them by 1680. Cue the Yamasee. They replaced the Westos as top middlemen, raiding Spanish missions in Florida. But the British got greedy, demanding Yamasee families as collateral for trader debts. This was a big mistake. In 1715, the Yamasee snapped. They allied with old enemies, the Choctaw and Catawba, and even freed Africans, sparking the Yamasee War. The carnage was wild. In months, 7% of South Carolina's colonists died. But native nations paid the highest price. The Catawba lost half their people. Survivors scattered, their power shattered. See, colonists realized native slaves were too risky. They knew the land and languages and could bolt into familiar forests. So Charleston traders pivoted to exports. From 1670 to 1715, up to 51,000 indigenous people were shipped to Barbados, Jamaica, and Bermuda. Most vanished into plantation anonymity, their stories erased. But wait, what about the why? Why erase this chapter? Simple. It's easier to sell a myth of empty land and savage wars than admit genocide built empires. The truth? Slavery wasn't a European invention, but they industrialized it, turning fluid systems into factory-like cruelty. And remember, this isn't ancient history. The same laws that labeled native slaves enemies to justify their bondage later fueled policies like Indian removal. The scars linger in tribal displacement, cultural loss, and silenced voices. Let's get one thing straight. History isn't black and white. Take the 5 civilized tribes: Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. These nations are often praised for adapting European customs, writing constitutions, building schools, and even wearing top hats. But there's a darker side to this story, one that's messy, painful, and rarely taught. By 1860, these tribes enslaved over 12,000 African Americans. Why? Because when survival's on the line, even the oppressed can become oppressors. After losing millions of acres to the U.S. government through broken treaties and forced land cessions, the 5 tribes faced a brutal choice: assimilate or disappear. Adopting Southern plantation culture wasn't about progress. It was a desperate Hail Mary. Enslaving Africans became a twisted badge of civilization, a way to say to white settlers, "See? We're just like you. Let us stay." The Cherokee Nation took this further than most. Their 1827 Constitution didn't just ban freed black people from citizenship. It barred their descendants forever. No voting, no land ownership, no rights. Meanwhile, Chickasaw and Choctaw leaders passed laws forbidding intermarriage between black and native people. The message was clear: we'll adopt your racism if it keeps us alive. But, you see, it didn't work. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 proved that no amount of mimicry would save them. Even as they built plantations and wore European clothes, the U.S. government still saw them as savages to be relocated. However, not all tribes treated slavery the same. The Seminoles, for instance, became a haven for runaway slaves from white plantations. In Florida's swamps, freedom had a price. Black recruits had to fight alongside Seminoles against U.S. troops. These alliances blurred lines. Some Black Seminoles gained influence, married into families, and even led raids. Contrast that with the Cherokee. Joseph Van was a wealthy Cherokee leader who inherited his father's empire, including 110 enslaved people. Van not only owned plantations, he ran steamboats staffed by enslaved crews. His Lucy Walker steamboat became infamous, not just for its speed, but for the whip marks on the backs of its workers. When the Cherokee were forced west on the Trail of Tears, Van made sure his enslaved laborers walked in chains beside him. Then there's the Chickasaw, who refused to free their enslaved population even after the Civil War. They dragged their feet until 1893, decades after emancipation. Why? Money. Their economy ran on cotton, and freeing workers meant financial collapse. When the Civil War erupted, the 5 tribes faced another impossible choice: side with the Union, which had betrayed them, or the Confederacy, which promised to protect slavery. The Cherokee Nation fractured. Stand Watie, a slave-owning Cherokee, became a Confederate general, leading raids to keep plantations intact. Meanwhile, abolitionists like Cherokee Chief John Ross argued slavery was immoral. Still, even Ross owned enslaved people early in his life. The Choctaw and Chickasaw openly backed the Confederacy, sending troops to fight. The Creek Nation split into 2 governments, one pro-Union and one pro-Confederacy, and went to war with itself. In the end, the tribes' gamble failed. The Union won, and the U.S. punished all tribes, regardless of their stance, by forcing them to free enslaved people and surrender more land. The Trail of Tears is remembered as Native genocide, a forced march where thousands died of starvation and disease. But enslaved Black people walked that same trail, often in worse conditions. Cherokee enslavers prioritized their survival, rationing food for themselves while their captives starved. In one chilling account, a Cherokee woman recalled her family bringing enslaved people west. "We could only carry so much. The slaves ate last." Meanwhile, Black survivors described watching Native families mourn their dead while ignoring the bodies of enslaved people left unburied on the trail. After emancipation, freed Black people in tribal territories faced a new nightmare. The Cherokee Nation demanded they leave Oklahoma despite many having Native ancestry. The Chickasaw refused to recognize Black freedom at all, leaving thousands stateless. In 1866, the U.S. forced the tribes to sign treaties granting Black people citizenship. But resentment festered. In the 1880s, Creek leaders famously declared, "They are not our people. They never were." Even today, descendants of tribal freedmen fight for citizenship rights, a lingering scar from this era. This story isn't about villains. It's about impossible choices in the face of genocide. The 5 tribes used slavery as a shield, betting it would protect their sovereignty. Instead, it corrupted their traditions and turned neighbor against neighbor. And let's be real, the U.S. government set this trap. By rewarding assimilation and punishing resistance, they pushed tribes to adopt the worst of colonial culture. The result? A twisted legacy where the oppressed replicated their oppressors. But slavery didn't vanish after the Civil War. It shape-shifted. Southern states swapped chains for loopholes. Take vagrancy laws. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. These laws targeted Native Americans for simply existing without a job. Get caught loitering? Congrats. You're now a prisoner forced to build railroads, mine gold, or pick cotton. Freedom? Not on the menu. Head west, and things got sneakier. you meet debt peonage, a rigged game where borrowing $5 for medicine could trap your family for generations. Here's how it worked. A Navajo man takes a loan from a rancher. But surprise, the debt balloons with wild interest rates, $50, $100, impossible sums. Can't pay? Then you work for free. Die trying? Your kids inherit the debt. Game over. Meanwhile, California had its horror show. In 1850, the state legalized apprenticeships for native kids. Cue white settlers snatching Pomo and Yurok children from their families. These kids weren't learning trades. They scrubbed floors, tended farms, and served households with zero pay or escape. By 1863, over 4,000 indigenous children were trapped in this legalized kidnapping ring. And guess who backed this system? The U.S. government. In 1874, the Supreme Court dropped a bombshell. United States versus Joseph ruled Native Americans couldn't testify against white people in court. So, if a rancher stole your land, kidnapped your child, or enslaved your family, tough luck. The law turned its back. Historian Andres Resendez calls this the other slavery, a shadowy web of exploitation that outlived traditional slavery by decades. Between 1492 and 1900, up to 5.5 million indigenous people were enslaved across the Americas. No records, no receipts. Just families vanished into mines, ranches, and unmarked graves. Let's set the record straight. Indigenous peoples didn't just endure oppression, they outsmarted it. In 1680, the Pueblo people flipped the script. After 80 years of Spanish rule, forced labor, banned rituals, and sacred kivas burned, a medicine man named Pope had a plan. He sent runners across New Mexico with deerskin strips, each knot marking a day until rebellion. When the last knot untied, all hell broke loose. On August 10th, Pueblo warriors raided Santa Fe. They torched missions, killed 400 colonists, and sent the Spanish fleeing south. For 12 years, the Pueblo reclaimed their land, traditions, and freedom. Spain eventually returned, but the lesson stuck. Mess with indigenous autonomy, and you'll pay. Not all fights looked like battles. The Comanche, masters of the southern plains, turned captives into power. They raided Mexican villages, selling some prisoners to Europeans while adopting others. A kidnapped child might grow up to lead raids against their birth community. Harsh? Yes. Strategic? Absolutely. Survival meant bending the rules, even if it fed the monster. Then there's the Apache. Enslaved kids, taken in raids, sometimes rose to lead war parties against their tribes. Imagine the complexity. Fighting kin to protect the people who stole you. There are no easy choices here, just survival in a rigged game. Fast forward to 1800s Florida. The Seminole, a mix of Creek rebels and escaped Africans, said nope to U.S. control. They vanished into swamps, launching guerrilla attacks so relentless that Washington spent $1 billion in today's money trying to crush them. After decades, the U.S. gave up, until oil was found on Seminole land. Surprise! Suddenly, the military remembered where Florida was, but the cost was staggering. California's native population plummeted from 300,000 to 30,000 between 1769 to 1848, thanks to missions doubling as labor camps. The Cherokee lost 4,000 souls on the Trail of Tears, including black slaves they'd once owned. Freedom for some, chains for others. Today, tribes are rewriting the narrative. The Duwamish trace relatives sold to Russian traders in the 1800s. Pueblo activists demand museums return ancestors' remains. bone stored as artifacts since the 1680 revolt. In 2022, the Indigenous Slavery Digital Archive began exhuming 10,000-plus stories of resilience buried in dusty records. These aren't ancient tales. The Yaqui, fighting Mexican deportation in the 1900s, used the same covert tactics as Popeye. Modern Navajo code talkers, descendants of peonage survivors, turned their language into a World War II weapon. Resistance isn't history. It's a living blueprint. Colonialism banked on indigenous collapse. Instead, it got Popeye's knots, Seminole swamps, and Comanche calculus. Every revolt, adaptation, and stolen child who became a leader proves one thing. Oppression's a slow burn, but resilience? That's forever. This wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about the use of language as a tool of slavery by the European settlers. Languages aren't just words. They're living libraries. Every syllable holds stories, recipes, jokes, and wisdom passed down for millennia. So when Spanish colonizers banned native tongues in missions, they weren't just silencing speech, they were burning down libraries. Take the Wampanoag. After helping English settlers survive and later enslave rival tribes, their language nearly vanished. By the 1800s, all that remained was a 1663 Bible, written in Wampanoag by a native scholar named John Eliot. That Bible gathered dust for centuries until Jesse Littledoe Baird, a Wampanoag linguist, cracked its code. Today, kids in Massachusetts text phrases like "Kuwikasun," see you later, reviving a language once whispered by ancestors who survived enslavement. If banning languages was a scalpel, U.S. boarding schools were a sledgehammer. From the 1870s to 1978, over 350 government-funded schools kidnapped Native children. The goal was to kill the Indian, save the man. Navajo, Apache, and Cherokee kids were stripped of their names and replaced with numbers or Anglo labels like Henry or Mary. Punishments for speaking native languages included lye soap scrubbed into mouths or beatings with leather straps. But the kids fought back. At Oklahoma's Riverside Indian School, Cherokee students secretly wrote diaries in Tsalagi, Cherokee syllabary, hiding them under floorboards. In Montana, Blackfoot children whispered stories in their language during midnight bathroom breaks. As survivor Isabel Wilbur, Nez Perce, recalls, "They cut our hair, burned our clothes, but they couldn't burn our memories." Colonizers didn't stop with the living. In the 1800s, scientists looted native burial sites, hauling skulls, bones, and sacred items to museums. Pueblo ancestors killed in the 1680 revolt became display pieces at Harvard. Navajo burial robes, woven with protective prayers, hung in glass cases labeled textiles. The 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRI, demanded institutions return stolen remains. But loopholes let museums cling to culturally unidentifiable bones. In 2021, Harvard still held 6,100 Native ancestors, including 19 tied to the Wampanoag. Activists like Shannon O'Loughlin, Choctaw, call it what it is. They're hoarding genocide trophies. Tribes now face bureaucratic mazes to rebury their dead. The Ponca spent 30 years fighting for 600 ancestors' return from Nebraska's State Museum. Today, revival is resistance. The Cherokee Nation now offers Tsalagi classes via TikTok. In Alaska, Yupik elders record bedtime stories in their language for grandkids. In 2023, the Wampanoag launched a language app with 10,000-plus words, all rebuilt from that single Bible. But reclaiming culture goes beyond words. The Seminole tribe of Florida buys back ancestral land strip-mauled by developers. The Sogorea Tay Land Trust, led by Ohlone women, repatriates California land through donations and activism. In 2022, the Karuk tribe reintroduced traditional fire practices to prevent wildfires, methods banned by settlers for 150 years. History's scars aren't just in museums, they're in policies. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA, created in 1824 to manage native displacement, still controls 55 million acres of tribal trust lands. Want to build a house on your reservation? You'll need BIA approval. Meanwhile, the Indian Health Service, born from treaties that promised care in exchange for land, remains so underfunded that some clinics lack running water. Legal systems repeat the past. In 2023, the Supreme Court ruled against the Navajo Nation in a water rights case, citing an 1868 treaty's ambiguous wording. Meanwhile, pipelines like Dakota Access plow through sacred sites, retracing slave trade routes. As Lakota historian Nick Estes notes, the same paths that carried our ancestors in chains now carry oil. In 2019, California Governor Gavin Newsom apologized for the state's genocide of Native peoples. This massacre reduced the population from 300,000 to 30,000. Critics called it lip service, but in 2023, California returned 10 acres to the Kashiapomo, whose ancestors were enslaved in Franciscan missions. It's a raindrop in an ocean of stolen land. Thank you for joining us once again. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.